Welcome back. Hank Moody returns to the show when he's not busy saving lives. In our emergency room, he's writing books. This is his second one out. It's called Against the Wall. This one, he says, came to him very quickly and was written very quickly. Hence the reason it was, only 6 months ago you were here for your first book. Welcome back to the show. First one was called Seesaw. This one's called Against the Wall. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, it's way different than the first book. My first book was much more a psychological thriller. And this sort of plays back, it's a more drama-related book, and plays back to 1981. I grew up in South Africa, and it's in that apartheid era where you see the gecko on the outside there. It's about a gecko. Well, the book is not about a gecko, but the book is about that perspective of if you were against the wall in a household in South Africa in 1981, what would you see? What's the life like of? It's basically the primary person in the story is Peter, who's an 8-year-old boy, and then his life is veering towards a traumatic week. And it starts out with a normal week, but then picks up momentum, and by the end of the week, he's at gunpoint. And so this whole story is how this comes around. What is going on in his household? What's the dramas? How does he perceive a 1981 apartheid era from the perspective of an 8-year-old?
Is he black or white?
He's a white boy. But he grows up in this relatively poor neighborhood in South Africa with all the turmoil going on. And he's hearing it through his parents and what's going on in the household. And there's... So it's a very violent time in South Africa. So from that perspective, it's how an 8-year-old, if you grew up with that, how would your perspective be different from, say, an 8-year-old in Canada or wherever? And I think from that perspective, I loved writing it because I grew up in that era. And I know that with my experience coming here, that people don't actually have a clue sometimes as to what it was like, because that's your perspective. That's your perspective. Everything that you've experienced in your life up to that point is the same everywhere. You know,
so you know I'm going to ask you, growing up in South Africa in the early 80s, apartheid was huge. How was your experience there?
Well, that's the norm. That's the Truman Show. It's basically you don't know that it's different anywhere else if you're an 8-year-old boy. I grew up with no black people around me. I grew up with, this is the way it is. When I go to a beach, there would be only white people on this beach. But if I go to another beach, that's where the black people would go. That was the norm. You don't go into a store with one entrance. There's 2 entrances for different people from different races. But you grow up, and that's the normal. So from my perspective, I loved writing this because I think it's an era that is unknown. And I think from that perspective, you can learn something about what it was to grow up there. And it was a very violent time. There was lots of fears. There was lots of bloodshed. And the story brings together how this boy starts figuring out things are not the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
And then there's the other person in there is a constable who has gone through the army, who's now a policeman. And their paths cross at the end of this story when everything comes to a head. And you get much more of the perspective of how the world was and how there were so many perspectives in that era and so many misperceived sort of ideas of the country. I sometimes compare, people ask me about this, and I say it's sort of like the story of if you were a German person growing up in the Nazi era, where you would think, how could the Nazis do that? But there were a lot of German people who grew up in that, and that was part of their norm until they sort of realized things aren't really great,
This isn't what is right.
Well, it's not what's right,
Yes, very interesting. So a lot of personal experiences are weaved throughout the tale.
Yeah, it's basically, it's all fiction, but it certainly brings that whole era around, how things were, how, what the concepts, thought processes were.
Yes.
And how people perceived the world, especially and that's why I loved writing it from a perspective of an 8-year-old, because you can sort of add up, and he's trying to add up how does it all fit together?
Yes.
And why does it work this way?
Very good. Obviously very passionate for you to write this if it came out so quickly. And Hank is going to be at Chapters this Saturday as of 1 o'clock. That is the time and date of the official book launch of Against the Wall. And so you're going to be there to do a book signing as well that day. People
At
can
1
come
o'clock,
and say hello and talk to you a little bit about your experiences and some of it showing up in the book. So thank you for being here to share this.
Thank you.
I can't help but wonder how long it's going to take for you to write another one.
Oh, it will take a little bit of time. This is quite a passionate write.
Yes.
I must say, sometimes you're lucky. I spoke with another author the other day, and he said, I was pretty lucky. Sometimes you're lucky where an idea just sort of percolates up and you can't stop it.
Yes.
Like waking up after a good dream and you just got to write it all down.
Yeah, good for you.
That sort of thing.
I was very blessed to be able to write that quickly, but I am sure it's fabulous.
Thank you.
All right. 1 o'clock at Chapters is where you can go for the official launch and a book signing as well. Hank will be there for some of the afternoon. You can buy this book at Chapters, also online. Information's on the screen. We're back after a quick break. Stay with us.